We're going to graph linear equations written in slope-intercept form. Anytime you see the word linear, when you graph it, you know it's going to create a straight line, meaning there's not going to be any curves or bends. Slope-intercept form. It's a form that's written as y equals mx plus b. That means that your variable y is on the left side of the equal sign all by itself, and you have everything else on the right side. So you have some number m that's multiplied by x, your variable x. So x and y stay as your variables. M and b are replaced by numbers. So m would be your slope. The number that's multiplied by x in this form is always your slope, or how steep your line is. What's added on, so it'll be some number added on. It's referred to as b. That would be your y-intercept, or the point where your graph crosses the y-axis. So I'm just going to go through a couple of equations, and we're going to identify the slope and y-intercept. So in this first one, it's y is all by itself on the left side. We have y equals 2x plus 1. So the slope, also called m, is the number that's multiplied by x in this form. So 2 is multiplied by x, so the slope is 2. Make sure you don't write 2x, it's just 2, the number that's multiplied by x. And what's added on, plus 1, so positive 1 would be our y-intercept. Okay, so let's look at a couple more, and then we'll go to some graphs. All right, so y equals 1/3 x minus 4. So the slope is the number multiplied by x in this form. Remember, it has to be in the form y equals. If there's anything else on the same side as y, we have to get y all by itself, or else it's not in slope-intercept form, and we wouldn't be able to identify what the slope was. Okay, so 1/3 is multiplied by x, so we know our slope is 1/3. This one's a little different. Since it's minus 4, you have to take that minus with a 4, so the y-intercept is at -4. That's very important. If you leave that off and you went through at positive 4 on the graph, that would be incorrect. All right, let's do two more, then we'll graph some. So y equals -x minus 5. Okay, so, well, if you have an x there, you have at least one x. So I'm going to put a 1 in front of that x. But it is -1. So that means that that number multiplied by x is -1. What's added or subtracted on is 5. So we have a -5, meaning the y-intercept is -5. And our last one, y equals x. All right, well, let's start with the slope. What number is multiplied by x? Well, if there's an x there, there's 1x, meaning x is multiplied by 1, so the slope is 1. Okay, y-intercept is always what's added on. Since there's nothing added on, that's the same thing as saying plus nothing or plus 0. So the y-intercept is actually 0. So anytime there's not a number added on, you can always put a plus 0 so you can identify the y-intercept. Okay, we're going to use these two to graph, so the slope and the y-intercept. Okay, so this first one. The slope is -3 because -3 is what's multiplied by x. So I'm just going to write that down. Y-intercept, what's added on, we have a +2, so a +2 is the y-intercept. Whenever you're graphing and you're dealing with slope, you always want it in rise over run form. Okay, so we have a -3. It's not in the fraction form where we can do rise over run, so we have to make that whole number into a fraction. Anytime you have a whole number, make it into a fraction by putting a 1 below it. So now we have rise -3, which means go down 3, run +1, which would be 1 to the right. Okay, so we're going to use our slope after we plot a point. The first point we're going to plot is the y-intercept. So y-intercept, that means where it crosses your y-axis. Remember, your y-axis is your vertical axis. So it crosses the y-axis at +2. So you need to find where y is +2. Right there. So you always plot that y-intercept first. Our graph went through our y-axis at 2. Now we're going to use our slope from there. So starting at the y-intercept, we're going to rise -3, so go down 3, 1, 2, 3. I'm not going to stop yet because we're going to run +1, so to the right 1. And that's how I found my second point. As soon as I have 2 points, I can connect them, draw my line, and this is the graph. I can put arrows on the end. Even if I don't, I do know that the graph would continue going on. So it would continue going on forever. So this is the graph of y equals -3x plus 2. Let's try another one. All right, the slope. It's in y-intercept form, so I know my slope is the number that's multiplied by x. So in this case, 2/5. It's a fraction, so it's in rise over run form. In my y-intercept, what's added or subtracted on, since it's a -3, my y-intercept is -3. So I always start by graphing my y-intercept. It's going to go through my y-axis at -3. So I look at the y-axis, and -3 is all the way down here. So I'm going to put a dot. That's the first point on my graph. From there, I use the slope. Rise +2, meaning going up 2 from my y-intercept. That's where I have to start. I know that's a point on my graph. So I go up 2, run +5, so that's to the right 5, and this is my second point on my graph. All right, so I have a couple for you to try. So go ahead and in the first two, find the slope and y-intercept. And in the numbers 3 and 4, go ahead and after you find the slope and y-intercept, graph them. You have a coordinate grid. Go ahead and graph those and see if you can figure out what the linear equation or straight line would look like. All right, so if you're ready for the answers, the first one, our slope is -3, y-intercept is +4. Number 2, the slope is 3/4. Y-intercept is -2 because there's that -2. Don't forget that minus has to come over as a negative. All right, then we have slope of number 3. We have a -x, meaning there's actually a -1x. So the slope is -1. Y-intercept is +5. All right, so to graph this, I know my y-intercept is +5, so it goes through my y-axis at 5. Slope, I want it in rise over run form because I have a whole number. To make it into a fraction, I just put a 1 below it. So my rise, starting at my y-intercept, my rise is -1, so that means down 1. My run is +1, so 1 to the right. I'm going to connect those 2 points, and that is my graph. And number 4, slope is 1/2. That's what's multiplied by x. Y-intercept, there's a -1, so y-intercept is -1, meaning my graph goes through the y-axis at -1. It's already in rise over run form for my slope. So that means from my y-intercept, I'm going to rise +1, run +2. And here is the graph of my last one. Hopefully you were able to graph linear equations.